Let me spoil the video for you. Russia does not have the cards. Everything is already in play. One of the immediate questions following Ukraine's daring drone deception to destroy Russian bombers was what the Kremlin would do to retaliate. You cannot let part of your nuclear triad get damaged without making the perpetrator pay, so the theory goes. And indeed, the next move drew a ton of attention, but in an unexpected twist, it was Ukraine striking again, this time a support column of the Crimean Bridge. Well, we have gone 4 days now since what Kyiv is calling Operation Spiderweb, and it has been 2 days since the bridge bombing. And while Western intelligence assessments indicate that Spiderweb's toll may not have been as bad as Ukraine originally claimed, though more images keep coming out, so who knows. And the bridge is still capable of supporting traffic despite this, at least until salt water gets into its cracks. It was still a very bad news cycle for the Kremlin. And yet, there is little to report in regard to retaliation. So, today, let's try to understand what is happening here. We will begin with a general theoretical question of how to time a retaliatory attack. Next will be the domestic problems that Russia has with making a commensurate response to Ukraine's attack. And finally, we will cover the major problem that Russia has with a lack of capacity to retaliate. We will be spending most of our time with that last explanation, because it underscores an important point about the broader war strategy currently going on. Oh, and reflecting the earlier points, we will also look at a couple of case studies on how Russia has handled similar situations previously. But we start with the timing issue. Remember, as I am producing this, only about 4 days have passed since Ukraine's initial attack. Besides a response of, fire more missiles, it is still a bit early to say that Russia will not do something to specifically reply to Ukraine's special military operation. Now, on Tuesday morning, Russia struck Sumy with 5 multiple launch rockets, killing at least 3 civilians. Some are describing this as Russia's response. Then, on Thursday morning, Russia also struck Kharkiv, even if that, again, does not quite feel like an actual response. Indeed, Trump talked to Putin on Wednesday. In this Truth Social post, which has now been deleted for reasons unclear, Trump said that Putin told him that Russia will do something to respond, all while Trump had an interesting interpretation of Ukraine's original strike. However, it is difficult to distinguish this from the war as usual. Russia was in the middle of an offensive in Sumy before the drone operation, something that we will return to later. Furthermore, Russia fired 2 Iskander missiles at Sumy, killing 35. That would sound more like a response to Operation Spiderweb, except that happened 2 months ago. So something else may be coming. And if you are watching this video from the future, after something else has indeed happened, take the rest of this video as an explanation for why Russia did not do more. And if Russia does try to do something splashy, then take the rest of this video as an explanation for why that is not exactly a great military idea. One of the 2 main constraints here is the domestic politics of Russia. If you look at the Russian media, there is precious little discussion of what happened over the weekend. And while there was acknowledgement of the attack on the Crimean Bridge, that too has the flavor of, meh, nothing to see here. It is notable that the Kremlin is not using the affairs as a means to benefit from a rally-round-the-flag effect, especially with the high signing bonuses that the government is now paying to contract soldiers. You might think that a little bit of spectacle would inspire greater patriotism, and thus better recruitment at lower offers. But it does make sense in the broader context of how the Kremlin is fighting the war. For more than 2 years now, the Kremlin has tried to push the consequences of the conflict away from the public discourse, out of fear of mass resentment, and then protest. This all due to the backlash from a large-scale involuntary mobilization in the fall of 2022. Many people are now signing large contracts to head over to Ukraine, of course, but that is their voluntary choice, and it is because of those large cash payments. A high salary by Moscow standards can be quite persuasive to a poor person who has spent his entire life in Siberia. Instead, Russian oligarchs are implicitly paying the costs of the war by underwriting all of the expenses for those signing bonuses, as well as the materiel production. To make a big deal of the attack would run counter to the narrative of business as usual for the average Russian, and that includes an exaggerated response to Operation Spiderweb. Thus, there is a political dimension to the Kremlin's caution. We will see whether the Crimean Bridge attack changes that. The bridge serves an important military purpose, but it is also used by civilians for normal bridge-related activities. Hence, it was impossible to hide the attack. Point is, people are more likely to register that something went wrong there. However, the real story here is about Russia's capacity to retaliate. Let's back up for a second. What exactly does retaliate even mean in this context? What is Russia supposed to do here? Start a war? They are already at war. Asking Russia to retaliate is close to asking Russia to try harder to win the war. Have you tried winning? I hear it is a good strategy. Or maybe you should try invading Kyiv to punish them. Well, I guess that about explains the problem. Russia is already pushing the limits of what it can do here. It cannot escalate to something like invading Kyiv, because it has already tried doing that, and it did not turn out so well. Okay, then maybe Russia should ramp up the pressure by using existing tactics. Maybe fire more missiles tonight at Ukraine? Sure. But where exactly are you getting those missiles from? It is not like Russia has a special reserve set of missiles that say, break glass in case of emergency. Doing more requires recruiting even more soldiers or building even more factories to produce even more missiles. However, the Kremlin is reluctant to take any of those steps because of the economic consequences. They would not look good. Thus, the only feasible way to reach those goals is to rally more of the public to your side. But we just discussed a minute ago about how that has its own set of political problems. Hence how I started the video. Russia does not have any more cards to play, because everything it has is already in play. Putin thus has to sit and wait to draw his next card before he can do anything. He is, what we call in the industry, playing off the top of the deck. And he will eventually draw something, but it will not necessarily be an ace. Indeed, Russia is firing its drones and missiles roughly at the rate that it is producing them. Russia could, in theory, borrow from tomorrow's pool of missiles, but then you are actually providing Ukraine with relief from tomorrow's barrage. And the fact that you are overloading things today means that you are not going to be as selective about targets, meaning that you are overall reducing the amount of damage that Ukraine suffers. Perhaps you can borrow against the stockpiles that Russia keeps on hand to coerce NATO countries. But bear in mind that arguably the primary effect of Operation Spiderweb was to reduce Russia's ability to fight NATO in the future. As such, the Kremlin would only be making that problem worse. Effective retaliation in light of these problems would mean that Russia would need to move into a domain that it has not yet touched, like the use of nuclear weapons. But there are reasons that the Kremlin has previously avoided taking such steps, and those reasons have not disappeared over the last few days. Think about the financial constraints that the Kremlin has been under due to paying for both the men and the materiel for the war. It is only feasible because Russia still has willing buyers for its oil in China and India. And those countries are only willing to participate because they can play the conflict off to their relatively indifferent domestic audiences as a regional affair that they are not a part of. Well, casually launching nuclear weapons at Ukraine would shatter that narrative. It would also encourage Western countries to sanction them if they continue making purchases, something that is already floating around in Congress without the extra encouragement of an actual nuclear detonation. Would that be worth the financial ruin to the Kremlin? Probably not. Alternatively, Russia could do something splashy and out of the ordinary, essentially matching Ukraine tit for tat. Problem there is that Ukraine took months to plan these attacks, because that is the reality of creative methods. Now, Russia may very well also be working on something creative, but to rush it out tomorrow, before it is ready, once again saves Ukraine from long-run damage. Perhaps there is indeed something splashy that Russia was close to completing. Then maybe we will see that soon, as a response that is more precisely Russia just fighting the war on its own timeline. Otherwise, what we get in response to 2 splashy Ukrainian attacks is more of the same from Russia. That Sumy offensive I mentioned earlier? Yeah, that is basically Russia's version of a response. Remember, Russia is the one with the initiative now. Ukraine's attacks are probably therefore better framed as the response rather than the initiation. Along those lines, we can see how Russia's limitations have constrained it before by looking at a couple of key points earlier in the war. The first of these is the saga involving HIMARS and the Russian Oreshnik missile. Let's flash back to the Biden administration, which had been reluctant to greenlight the use of ATACMS on Russian territory. However, after Russia began using its own territory as staging grounds for cross-border raids, Biden opened up the floodgates. You might remember Russia's response. Putin announced the use of a hypersonic Oreshnik missile, capable of delivering a nuclear weapon. You are watching the corresponding speech right now. I was hoping to find a nice image of Putin standing next to one, but this is all I got when I searched the Kremlin's website. It turns out that Oreshnik is Russian for hazel tree, and the Kremlin website has an entire second half dedicated to the flora and fauna that Russia has to offer. So cute. Anyway, this was supposed to be some major warning shot to the United States and Ukraine. Stop doing it, or else. Remember, Oreshniks can deliver nuclear weapons. But here is the thing. There are a lot of delivery platforms suitable for nuclear weapons. In fact, some of the bombers that Operation Spiderweb destroyed have been both used during the invasion of Ukraine and could be used in a nuclear war. This whole speech was not really doing anything new, and Oreshnik by itself is not impressive. Here is a look at the damage. If you told someone that this was the result of standard Russian weapons, they would probably believe you. Consequently, the United States maintained the green light for Ukraine, and Russia never really followed up on the threat again. Meanwhile, here is a second case study: Ukraine's invasion of Kursk. Now that should trigger some type of serious response. Maybe even nukes. Russia was now getting invaded, for goodness sake. Again, no. China and India still would not have put up with a Russian nuclear attack. Heck, such an incident does not even cross the Kremlin's official doctrine on the use of nuclear weapons. And it was not like Russia could respond by just invading more. The Kremlin was already trying its best on the Eastern Front. Instead, what we saw is Russia having to solicit North Korean help to beat back Ukraine's advances. I suppose that qualifies as a response, but it probably is not what most people have in mind after this week. So will the Kremlin do something more to explicitly respond to Operation Spiderweb and the bridge attack? Maybe. But it is not like Russia has some sort of magic easy button to press that will magically and easily punish Ukraine. Because if the Kremlin did, they already would have pressed it. Speaking of pressing buttons, it only takes a couple to order one of these 2 fantastic books about the war. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.